Managing risks in highly regulated industries. Welcome to the BetterBots podcast series, the podcast for chairs, CEOs, non-executive directors, company secretaries, and their advisors. Every episode is filled with practical insights and learnings from those inside boardrooms. We discuss what really matters and highlight actionable steps you can take to enhance the performance of your board. When we do board evaluations at the moment, we of course speak with members of risk committees. And on occasions, we observe risk committees in actions. Now, it is very clear that the breadth, depth, and frequency of risks have increased. When we get up in the morning, you instantly see the news, risk everywhere. So, serving on risk committees is particularly challenging at present due to the rapidly evolving nature of risks, increasing external pressures, and the need for new approaches to oversight and resilience. Key factors that will continue to make it highly demanding are the sheer pace and complexity of risks, the need for risk committees to balance risks, mitigation and opportunity, heightened external and regulatory scrutiny, and greater stakeholder complexity. So we thought it is appropriate to put on an episode on managing risks in highly regulated industries. I'm delighted to talk to Terri Duhon. Terri is an award-winning educator and TED speaker. She went from a master's degree at MIT to a derivative trader on Wall Street and then on became an entrepreneur and author. She is now a board member of a number of large institutions such as Morgan Stanley International, Wise, and Rathbone. She is also a guest speaker at the LSE and Oxford University, where she is an associate fellow for the Saïd Business School. Terri, thank you so much for contributing to the BetterBots podcast series.
I'm excited to be here, as always.
Fantastic. You do something quite remarkable. You specialize in chairing risk committees, and that in highly regulated industries. That's what you do.
I love that you think that that's remarkable. Why do you think that's remarkable?
I think it's remarkable because you must be quite focused to do that. And we come to this because at the moment, the breadth and depth and frequency of risks have, of course, increased tremendously.
Yeah, look, this is 100% true. But I think it's important to recognize that the board owns everything. The board as an entity owns strategy. It owns oversight of audit and the financials. It also owns all the risk, right? It delegates some of the hard work to the risk committee, but it doesn't delegate the ownership necessarily. So yes, the legwork. I mean, I'm a worker.
Exactly.
I'm working for the board and I've been mostly lucky. Most of my risk committees are actually populated by most of the board. So it's not like there's a small group of us that have to go away and do a bunch of hard work and then explain it to everyone because some of it can be a bit technical. You know, I get broadly to share all of that with and really draw up on all the resources around the table. So that's a good starting point anyway.
So how did you get into this? You could say, I serve as a non-executive director, full stop. But no, you specifically focus on risk committees. How did you get into this?
Well, it's a good question. When I first started on Wall Street, so right after MIT, I went straight to JP Morgan and I was a trader, a derivative trader. And actually, I didn't call myself a trader because at JP Morgan, we called ourselves risk managers. Now, this is over 30 years ago now, but we called ourselves risk managers. And I remember hearing these stories about all these kind of, gunslinging, swashbuckling traders running around Wall Street back and I was trying to, who are these people? And somebody turned to me and they were like, that's you, Terri, that's what you do. And I said, no, I'm a risk manager. And I think it's funny because words matter. What you call yourself matters. And I yes, I was a trader in the way that most people thought about. I was a liquidity provider to the street, to our clients, to the buy side. If you wanted to buy the derivative I was trading, I sold it. If you wanted to sell it, I bought it. That's what I did. I also was a prop trader. I took risk the firm's behalf. So I was properly a trader, but the framework around which we operated at JP Morgan was risk. I was a risk manager. I had to manage all the risk I was taking on behalf of either clients or the firm. And I think that always stuck with me as something that I knew and understood. Mm-hmm. But also, to be fair, I was lucky because I was in a place, JP Morgan, which was really thinking about risk management really cleverly at the time and very cutting edge. And, JP Morgan came up with the VAR concept and the DEAR concept. DEAR is, nobody uses it anymore, but it was sort of daily earnings at risk. Now we talk about VAR, which is value at risk. But, so as a trader, I was always looking at my VAR numbers, my DEAR numbers, and how much capital, the return on the capital that I was allocated, that I was using. So we were very ahead of our time, if you think 30 something years ago. So I always felt very confident and comfortable in that space. We were also, as a firm, we looked at counterparty credit risk, again, very, very ahead of our time. Not all firms were thinking about the credit risk that you took when you had a counterparty, when you had a derivative trade on. We were managing our collateral carefully. We were very ahead of our time. And I'm not going to say we were perfect. We were early, so there were lots we was still learning and still evolving, but I've always felt comfortable in the space.
So let's move fast forward to 2025. This sheer breadth, as I said, the breadth, the depth, and the frequency of risks have increased. Actually, I see the risk registers growing, when I do these board evaluations. How do you deal with it on the committees you chair?
Well, it's a good question. So I guess I split the world, and a lot of people do. I split the world between financial risks, so the things I just talked about, credit, market, capital risk, liquidity risk. Those are all financial risks and things we have been quantifying for a very long time. As I described from the early days, my early days on Wall Street 30 some years ago. The non-financial risks, so that the operational risk, the cyber risk, the reputation risk, the regulatory risk, the change risk, the transformation risk, there's a whole list, you're right, and it keeps growing. The non-financial risks are harder to quantify, and they require a lot of thought and a lot of engagement with different businesses to think through. The way that I normally look at things is, sure, we're going to have a big long list of risks that you've identified. That's fine. But tell me at a committee level, what are the top 3? What are the top 5? I can't walk away from this committee and think that there are 12 big things that we're concerned about. Let's just tell me the top 3, the top 5, or give me some RAG ratings and tell me which ones we're really worried about today. Either from a size perspective, this one's really big today, this one's gotten bigger today, or this one, we can control this, we cannot control, there are things we can do, there are things we can't do. I can't walk away with a big long list. That would make me incredibly uncomfortable. So as a chair, I say, look, what are the big things I have to focus on today? Give me 3 things. And that's what we're going to be challenging. That's what we're going to be focusing on. And if you give me a big long list and you say everything's amber, right? If we RAG rate it, we put a red, amber, green, or red, yellow, green, if you're American. If we RAG rate stuff and you tell me everything's amber, that doesn't work for me. What does that mean? That means everything's kind of a risk. I mean, there needs to be a bit of a thought process about which ones are you tackling first? How are you prioritizing your time? We don't have infinite resources. We don't have infinite time in a risk committee. Really, what are the priorities? And then let's dig in.
And that is exactly what I find a lot of boards are struggling with, being ruthless about deciding on the priorities.
It is really, really important because the fact is that boards are presented with so much information, and we really, our job is to oversee. We provide oversight. So we've got 5 hours once a quarter, or, a risk committee has 4 hours once a quarter. Maybe it's 4 times a year. Maybe it's 5 times a year. One of my boards, we met monthly for a few years because we had a lot of work to do. But, we then scaled it back because we were able to, because we did a lot of that work. So you do have to think about your frequency and what's important and how much time you need to dedicate. But the fact is, let's say on average, 4 or 5 hours a quarter, what are we going to focus on as a committee? We can either skim 1,000 pages, or we can really think about 50 pages, right? We can skim 20 risks, or we can really, dive in and really challenge the top 3. And I don't believe that board work where you just skim every quarter is valuable. I believe that, if things are going well and, there's not really some big issue that you're working on, which is rare. I can't remember when that has ever really happened, but maybe you can kind of skim over a bunch of stuff and all looks fine. We're in BAU, things are great. But to be fair, as you said, the world is changing rapidly around us, and technology is driving a lot of those changes. And obviously, geopolitical risks laid on top, increased volatility and increased financial risks. Mm-hmm. And so there's no such thing as sitting around doing nothing, I don't think, from now onward and for many years, as you rightly highlight. So each quarter, let's just focus on the big ones and see if we're making progress, see if we can provide some appropriate challenge, see if we can support. Is there anything we can do as a board or as a risk committee to help? And just, keep moving forward that way.
Tell us your secret. How do you decide on the top 3? And is between the different roles you have, you sit on numerous boards, are there the same top 3 risks, or do they vary greatly?
Well, I haven't always been the deciding factor there. One board, I picked up one particular issue that the CRO highlighted to me, and it was clear that it was a very big challenge, and it was thematic and pervasive across all of the papers that I saw. And I said, this is the only thing we're going to focus on for the next however long until we feel comfortable. And we looked at other stuff. Sure, we gave time in the committee to the other stuff we had to look at, but it was the biggest thing. It was critical. And, we turned to first line and we said, look, you own this. What are you doing? What's the plan? How are we going to fix this? Let's track it. We want to be, on top of it. Sometimes the chair has turned to me and said, look, this is a big issue. It's really a board issue, but we don't have time in the board. The issues around it are risky. It's really, they are risk issues, but it's so big, the board does own it, but I'm going to ask you to take it in the risk committee because we don't have time. So can you pick this up? And I've said, of course. And then most of the other time, I turn to the CRO and I say, what do you think the issues are? What are the big ones right now? Because, and this is the big critical point and big added value of a risk chair, is to turn to the CRO and say, have you sat down, really given yourself some time to think, and stepped back, looked across everything you're doing, and you're busy, but have you given yourself an hour, Monday morning when you're fresh, and thought, what are the top 3 things I care about that I need to bring to the board's attention? That's where I think a risk chair adds value, because you kind of demand that your CRO pause and think. And then the other way that you add value is you say, I don't want 1,000 pages. I can't read 1,000 pages, and the rest of my committee isn't going to read 1,000 pages. I need 50 or 100, whatever the number is. I need 50 critical pages. Everything else goes to the appendix. So between all these people who I need to see presenting from these different business units and from these different functions, you get 50 pages.
Yeah.
So you go and fight it out. But I don't want a regurgitation of MI from the executive. I want you to think, look across this stuff and tell me what the themes are, what's the context, and what do we care about as a board and as a risk committee.
You alluded to it, but let's spell it out for our listeners. What do the members of your risk committee do that you as a chair find particularly helpful?
They bring all their different perspectives to the table. And it is so critical for me as a risk chair because I go through the pack and I think it through and I think, okay, well, the regulator expects us to approve this stuff. We're going to do this stuff. We have to do these things. But, the theme here is X or the theme is Y, or we're going to focus on these three. I'll sometimes send an email to the rest of the risk committee and say, look, it's a big pack, but this is what we're going to focus on. Or I'll, have chats with different members, different NEDs, just saying, look, I want us to focus on this. In one of my boards, I have pre-meets. So before the GRC, I take 30 minutes and I listen to each NED and I say, what's the biggest thing that came out of these risk papers for you? Mm-hmm. And I take notes. And I always find something new when I listen to them. It's fantastic. I mean, we often all hit on the same issue because, it's generally very obvious when you're a board member because you think, hang on a minute, this is, I can see these dots here. I can connect these dots, or we know what's going on in the business. So we're worried about something or we're thinking about something, but the questions they ask are also different. So I can chair all by myself. And by the way, I have done that in certain scenarios. I've, been the only non-executive in the room where I provide all the challenge, on each topic. That's fine. But it's nowhere near as powerful as the different perspectives coming to the table from different people around the room with different experiences.
Absolutely. And now let's look at the output, what you produce as a risk committee, and you feed back to the whole board. What outputs have you seen are particularly useful and valuable for the whole board?
Well, that's a good question. I think, as I said, most of my risk committees are attended by all of the NEDs. So in updating the board, we don't actually have to repeat what we've all just seen. So on some boards, there is no update to the board, but there are action, right? There are always actions that come out of a risk committee for me. I don't chair a risk committee without coming out with, 2 or 3, in some cases, many more actions because I just, look, we've discussed this, we've asked these questions. I'd like to see this, please, next time, or this, please, in 6 months' time, or actually, I'd like to revisit this topic in a year, depending on how big the project is or how much progress can be made in a period of time. And so, the output really is a function of the actions and the changes to the risk register, how the risk register changes over time. And that's not the output of the risk committee, but that if we're focused on something going from red to green, what is the path to green and how have we overseen that path and how have we challenged the assumptions and the ownership of whichever executive has it.
Now, our listeners really love real practical hands-on insights. What does good look like on a risk committee? If you summarize it in maybe maximum three top things.
What does good look like? One of my CROs said, when I go and see the regulators, I want to be able to tell them that my risk chair beat the crap out of me. And that my risk committee is really, really challenging, that they've challenged me. Because ultimately, as I started at the beginning, the board has ownership, delegates the work to the risk committee. We don't own any of this. But so what that means is decisions that the executive make, we are there to challenge those decisions. We're not there to make those decisions necessarily. We're there to challenge them, maybe ask for a few changes or rethinks, but then we're there to kind of approve and support once we've provided the challenge. So in order to be able to kind of approve and support, we need to know that decisions that were made had some strong, robust debate and governance around them, right? Mm-hmm. How did those decisions get made? How did you decide to rag rate like this? How did you decide that these were the big issues? Where were the debates? How did you decide to allocate capital here? How did you decide to, reserve capital here? How did you decide to focus on this issue? How did you, we challenge the robustness of the process as opposed to challenging the decision itself, challenging the output. And so if we think the process was robust enough and we provided some of our own challenge, then we're there to support. So we want to provide appropriate challenge. We want to see appropriate challenge and robust conversation before it gets to us. I think that's good. I think challenging the material that comes to you and ensuring that you don't get thousands of pages, but you get, your 50 pages or your 100 pages, and they really do highlight what you need to see. I think that's really valuable. When you do have big risks, asking for path to green or asking for very specific ownership on action items so that you can hold people to account. I think that's what good looks like.
Super. Sadly, we have to come to an end. And there's always this question, what are the 3 things our listeners should take away from this podcast?
Remembering, I think the key thing is that our job as board members is to challenge and support. We oversee more than we make those decisions. We oversee those decisions by challenging and supporting. And in order to do that, we have to ask for thought. We have to ask for real thoughtfulness to go into the papers so that we can have good debate in the room and good conversation in the room. And we have to ask for accountability.
Great. Anything else they should take away from this podcast?
Oh, am I missing anything else? There's, running a risk committee is really fun. I mean, it's really fun. I think the thing you should take away is that it can be hard work too. When I say hard work, it takes some thought. And so it takes energy. And so, we've also got to figure out, risk can be fun and super interesting. And you've also got to manage people's energy levels throughout the day by providing a bit of energy into the room, making sure people get, appropriate breaks, and then setting up the agenda such that you can get the good stuff done, the critical stuff done at the beginning. And then some of the other, some of the smaller bits and pieces coming at the end where people have less energy. Thinking carefully about how you're using the energy, I think, is important. But mostly, the takeaway is that the risk committee is actually quite fun. I think it's much more fun than the audit committee, for example.
Fantastic. Terri, thank you so much for contributing to the Better Bots podcast series.
Great. I hope that was helpful.
The podcast episode is part of the Better Bots podcast series, brought to you by Better Boards, the provider of board evaluation solutions. Get in touch if you are interested in joining our community, learning more about our work and our innovative board evaluation platform. Our clients use the platform for both internal and fully facilitated external board evaluations. We at Better Boards are always delighted to hear from you. You can best reach us at info@better-boards.com. Thank you for listening.